I could have screamed. I could have confronted them right there. But something told me to stay silent. Something told me to think. So I walked out, made one phone call, and set a trap that would catch a murderer. 12 years of marriage, a blended family, a life I thought was built on love. All of it was a lie designed to kill me. This is the story of how I discovered the truth and what that truth cost me. Welcome to this story. Please hit like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. A quick note, this narrative includes fictional elements added for dramatic impact and educational value. Names and locations are coincidental if they match real life, but the message is entirely true. Now let's begin. It was 6 o'clock on a December evening in Phoenix. One of those nights when the temperature hadn't dropped below 103 degrees all day, and the heat still radiated off the concrete like the earth itself was angry. The kind of heat that makes you move slower, think slower, feel like you're moving through water instead of air. I was about to walk into my garage holding a warm bag of fried chicken from Kroger still steaming against my palm. The grease from the paper bag had soaked through onto my hand, warm and slick. I had picked it up because I thought, maybe stupidly, that we could have one normal night. One night where nothing was broken. One night where my wife and I could sit down together and pretend that the last few months of tension hadn't happened. I had no idea it was the last normal moment of my life. The garage smelled like it always did, cold concrete mixed with motor oil and something metallic underneath. That sour, familiar bite that never really leaves no matter how many times you sweep. It's the smell of work, of tools, of a place where things get fixed. The overhead light was off, so the only illumination came from the little window above the workbench and the pale glow of a phone screen. Someone was in here. Someone was on the phone and they didn't know I was coming. That's when I heard her voice. It was Vivian, my stepdaughter, 20 years old, the kind of girl who had smiled at me on my wedding day, like I was her hero. Her voice was quiet, almost matter-of-fact, the way you might discuss a grocery list or a homework assignment. "Yeah, the brakes are ready," she said. "We just need him to drive tomorrow." The words didn't register at first. Not really. They just floated there in the garage air like they meant nothing. Like she had just commented on the weather. My brain didn't process them. It was too busy trying to understand what she was saying. The brakes. My truck. Tomorrow. And then I heard my wife. Sophia's voice came through the phone speaker, tinny and distant but clear enough. She was asking a question. One single question that would change everything. "You're sure?" Not, "That's not true." Not, "What are you talking about?" Not even, "Oh my God, no." Not the horrified reaction of someone who had just heard their daughter describe something terrible. Just a confirmation, a check-in, like she was verifying that the plan was actually going to happen. "Yeah," Vivian said. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't waver. She sounded calm. She sounded certain. "It's done." I stopped moving. I don't mean I just paused. I mean every muscle in my body forgot how to work. My lungs forgot how to breathe. My heart forgot its rhythm. The bag of chicken, warm, greasy, still steaming, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. The warmth of it suddenly felt obscene. How could something so normal, so innocent exist in the same moment as this? "He won't make it to Monday," Vivian continued. And then she laughed. Actually laughed like somebody had just told her a joke at a dinner party. Like she had just said something funny instead of something that would end a human life. That laugh. That's what broke me. Not the words about the brakes. Not the admission that something had been done to my truck. It was the laugh. Because laughter meant she didn't care. Laughter meant this was easy for her. Laughter meant this wasn't some desperate act born from fear or desperation. This was calculated. This was cold. This was the laugh of someone who had already accepted what was going to happen and found it amusing. And my wife. The woman I had loved for 11 years. The woman I thought I had finally built a life with after my first marriage fell apart in quiet exhaustion. The woman I had promised to grow old with, she didn't tell her stepdaughter to stop. She didn't say, "That's going too far." She didn't even sound shocked. There was no gasp of horror, no voice raised in anger or fear. Nothing that suggested she was hearing something she didn't expect to hear. Instead, I heard her exhale into the phone. A small sound barely there, but I heard it. And in that breath, I heard relief. The relief of someone who had already made a decision, someone who was just checking to make sure the plan was solid, someone who was thinking, "Okay, it's really happening. Good. Tomorrow." Sophia said, her voice soft and certain, not urgent, not frightened, just certain. "Just be careful." That's when my stomach dropped so hard, it felt like I had missed a step on the stairs and was falling through empty space. That's when I understood. Not with my mind. My mind was still somewhere back in the driveway, confused about what I was hearing, replaying the words over and over like they might mean something different the second time. But somewhere deeper, somewhere that doesn't think or reason, somewhere in the reptilian part of the brain that knows fear, I understood the truth. My wife and my stepdaughter had decided to kill me. I didn't scream. I didn't charge back into that garage and demand an explanation. I didn't do any of the things a man in shock is supposed to do. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't fall to my knees. Instead, I did the only thing my training, 30 years of HVAC work, 30 years of staying calm when things broke, 30 years of thinking before acting would allow. I backed up. Slowly, carefully, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. My boots scuffed the concrete, a small sound, almost nothing, but in that moment it might as well have been a gunshot. A soft whispering sound, the friction of rubber on stone. "Hold on," I heard Vivian say. Something in her voice had changed. The casual certainty was gone. Now there was a tension. Focus. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there in the darkness between the garage and my driveway, listening to my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like a drum, like something trying to escape from my chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard the movement. Vivian's head snapping toward the garage door. A quick, sudden shift. The sound of someone whose attention had just shifted from their phone to something real. Something that might be a threat. For one eternal second, I thought she was going to come looking for me. I thought she was going to step through that garage door and see me standing there and understand that I had heard everything. I thought about what would happen next. If she came out. If she saw me. If she went back inside and told Sophia. But she didn't. Instead, I heard her voice lower, become urgent, become something almost like fear. "Yeah, he's somewhere in the house. I gotta go." The line went dead. That silence was worse than anything else. That silence meant she knew. That silence meant they were still on the line, still connected, still planning. That silence meant I had just a few seconds, maybe less, before my stepdaughter came looking for me, before my wife knew that I had heard everything, before everything I thought I knew about my life shattered like glass. I pulled the garage door shut behind me without a sound, not slowly fast enough that it looked normal to anyone watching, but controlled enough that it didn't click or slam. The kind of movement you make when you're just coming home, not the kind of movement you make when you're running for your life. Then I walked. Not to my truck. Not to the house to confront them. Not to call the police. I walked to my old sedan, the work beater that Sophia had always been embarrassed by, parked in the driveway, like it didn't belong next to her new BMW. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I didn't run. That was the smart thing about me, always had been. And I wouldn't slam the door either, though every cell in my body wanted to. Instead, I closed that garage door the way a man closes a jewelry box, slow, careful, deliberate. My fingers found the handle cool under my palm. I pressed down with the kind of control you don't learn in a classroom. It's something that lives in you when survival becomes the only option. The kind of thing your ancestors figured out a long time ago when staying alive meant staying silent. The door glided shut without a whisper. No click. No announcement to the world that I'd just overheard my wife and stepdaughter plan my death. My old sedan waited in the driveway like it knew what was coming. A 2009 Honda Civic. Nothing fancy, nothing that drew attention. I'd bought it 5 years ago because it was reliable, because it could go unnoticed in a parking lot, because sometimes you don't know you're buying a getaway car until you actually need one. The keys were in my pocket. I always kept them there. I slid into the driver's seat without looking back at the house. The interior smelled like stale coffee, and the air freshener Vivian had stuck under the seat months ago, some fake vanilla scent that I'd never gotten around to removing. Now it just smelled like time running out. The December evening in Phoenix was still hot, 98 degrees even this late, though the radio said it was dropping fast. The kind of heat that makes you feel like you're breathing through a wet towel, even at night. But my hands were cold. My knuckles were white around the steering wheel as I pulled out of the driveway. Slow, normal, casual. The kind of drive that wouldn't look suspicious from the kitchen window, where she was probably still laughing on the phone. My wife had laughed. That was the part that kept circling back like a song you can't get out of your head. Not shocked. Not denying it. Not even pretending to be horrified. Just laughing. That particular laugh she'd perfected over the years, the one that made you feel stupid for even questioning her. The streets of Phoenix unwound before me like a map I didn't recognize anymore. 4th Avenue, Camelback Road. I kept my speed, even watched the lights turn from red to green like they didn't mean anything. Every second felt like a minute. Every minute felt like the whole evening was getting away from me, dissolving into something I couldn't put back together. I couldn't call the cops now. That was the first real thought that broke through the static in my head, and it came with a kind of clarity that scared me more than anything else that night. They'd ask me why I didn't call immediately, why I drove around instead of running straight to a police station. And in a town like Phoenix, in any town, the first story wins. The first voice gets to shape what everyone believes. Sophia would call them first. I knew this the way you know your own face in the mirror. She'd cry, probably. She was good at crying when it served her purpose. She'd say I was unstable, that I'd been making threats, that I'd been acting paranoid for months. She'd have Vivian ready with some story about me being controlling, manipulative, maybe even dangerous. She'd paint me as the villain before the police even knew there was a story to tell. I'd seen her do it before. Not with murder, but with money. With truth. With the way she could reshape reality, just by saying it confidently enough. The way she could make you doubt your own memory of events that happened 5 minutes ago. That's what marriage to Sophia taught you, that reality is whatever she says it is. I drove for 40 minutes without really thinking about where I was going. Just away. Away from Scottsdale where we lived. Away from the house with its clean kitchen and its perfect furniture. And its darkness that was somehow darker now. I took random turns watching the city lights blur past. Palm trees, strip malls, fast food joints. Everything looked the same, and nothing looked real anymore. Route 4 appeared like a lifeline. I took it without planning to. The motel sign came into view around 10:45 p.m., the kind of place that doesn't ask questions and doesn't care if you pay in cash. Desert Nights Motel. 59 night. Vacancy. I'd driven past it 100 times over the years and never thought I'd actually stop here. Now it felt like the only place in the world where I could breathe. The parking lot was half empty. Good. A couple of pickup trucks, a sedan with a broken taillight, a motorcycle, The kind of place where nobody paid attention to who came and went. The kind of place where you could disappear for a night if you needed to. The desk clerk was maybe 60 with the kind of face that had seen everything and forgotten most of it. He barely looked at me, which was exactly what I needed. I paid for 3 nights in 20's $177 total and didn't use my real name. Just something my brain pulled from the air at the last second. Richardson. Derek Richardson. Derek was my best friend. Using his last name felt like asking for help, without asking. Room 12, the clerk said, handing me a key attached to a plastic diamond. His voice was rougher than gravel. Around back, ice machines by the office. I didn't care about ice. I took the key and walked back into the Arizona night. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and bleach, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes with cheap motels. 2 double beds with synthetic floral spreads, a TV from maybe 2010 with a cable box that probably had 50 channels of the same nothing, a window with curtains thick enough to keep out the Phoenix sun and anything else trying to get a look inside. I locked the door. I chained it. I put the deadbolt on. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, closest to the window, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I looked at my phone. 11:17 p.m. The screen showed 3 missed calls from Sophia and 5 text messages from Vivian. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I already knew what they'd say. "Where are you, Dad's worried. Why aren't you answering?" Vivian had said tomorrow. Tomorrow morning. That's when she'd expect me to be in the truck. That's when she'd expect me to turn the key and feel the brake pedal go soft under my foot. That's when the brakes. I couldn't think about that. Not yet. Not in this room with the ice machine rattling outside and a couple arguing through the wall in Spanish and the sound of Route 4 traffic like a constant heartbeat. Instead, I thought about the fact that I was sitting in a room that cost $59 a night using a fake name with nothing but the clothes on my back and whatever was in my wallet. I thought about how my wife was at home right now, probably cleaning up the kitchen, probably acting like nothing had happened. I thought about how Vivian was probably in her room, my stepdaughter, my responsibility for the last 8 years, young enough to sleep soundly, old enough to plan a murder. The air conditioning kicked on with a rattle that sounded like bones. Somewhere down the line, a siren wailed past on Route 4 heading toward something I'd never know about. And all I could think was, they're waiting for tomorrow. They're waiting for me to drive that truck. And I've got until sunrise to figure out what the hell I'm going to do about it. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. I'd moved past fear somewhere around 6:30 p.m. when I drove past the house for the 3rd time. No, it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was betrayal. The kind that doesn't hit you all at once, but settles in slowly like poison in your bloodstream, and by the time you notice it, it's already everywhere. I lay on that motel bed in the dark, and the conversation in the garage played on repeat. Not just the words, those were bad enough, but the tone, the casual cruelty of it. The way Vivian said it, like she was talking about a DIY project, and the way Sophia laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then my mind did what minds do when you're alone in the dark at 3 a.m. with nowhere to run. It started connecting dots. I thought about the day we got married. 8 years ago. I'd been so sure that time, so completely certain. After my first marriage fell apart, I'd spent 5 years rebuilding myself. I got sober. I went back to community college and got my HVAC certification. I bought the Civic. I worked weekends to pay off my debts. And then I met Sophia at a coffee shop on Camelback Road, and she smiled at me like I was something she'd been looking for. I'd thought I'd finally found peace. That was the lie I told myself. Not that she lied to me, though she did, but that I lied to myself first. 8 years. We'd had 8 years, and somewhere in that time I'd become the enemy. But when exactly did I become something she wanted dead? The question kept circling. I got out of bed and paced the small room. 3 steps to the window. 3 steps back. The ice machine outside hummed like a trapped animal. A car drove past on Route 4. Everything felt like a dream, except dreams don't have this kind of clarity. Dreams are fuzzy. This was sharp as broken glass. I thought about the house, the clean kitchen where Sophia made her perfect dinners, the bedroom where I'd slept next to someone planning my death, the garage where I'd gone to put away the chicken and ended up hearing the truth. All those moments, all those nights, all the times I'd reached for her in the dark, and she'd been what? Planning, waiting, laughing at me. That's when I hit the pillow. Not hard enough to break anything, just hard enough to break the silence. Just hard enough to let some of the rage out before it consumed me completely. I stood there in the dark, breathing like I'd run a marathon, my fists still clenched. And then just as fast as the anger came, it drained away. Like a door closing, like a valve shutting off. I walked to the bathroom. The mirror was small, the light harsh. I looked like a man who hadn't slept, which I guess I was. There were dark circles under my eyes. My jaw was tight. For a second, I didn't even recognize myself. But I needed to. I needed to look at myself and understand something fundamental. You need to survive. I said it out loud, and my voice sounded like a stranger's. That's all that matters right now. Not anger, not hurt, not wondering when she stopped loving you, or if she ever did. Survival. That comes first. I stood there watching myself in that bathroom mirror, and I thought about work, about the systems I'd installed over the years. HVAC units are complicated. They have compressors and condensers, evaporator coils, expansion valves, 100 different parts that have to work together in a specific way. You can't fix an HVAC system by ripping into all the parts at once. You have to approach it methodically, one component at a time. You have to understand the problem before you can solve it. That's what I needed to do now. Break this down. Understand the pieces. Not act, not yet. Just understand. Patience is my tool, I said to the man in the mirror. Patience. I said it again, slower this time. Patience is my tool. It wasn't just words, it was a decision. A commitment to not let rage or grief or shock dictate what came next. There would be time for anger later. Right now, I needed to think clearly. I needed to survive the night, survive the morning, survive tomorrow. And to do that, I needed a plan. I went back to the bed and lay in the dark. The clock on the nightstand read 3:47 a.m. Sunrise was still hours away. And in those hours, while Sophia slept in our house and Vivian dreamed in her room, I needed to understand how we got here. How did I marry a woman who laughed about killing me? How did I become the enemy in my own life? The questions sat there like stones in my chest. Heavy, real, and somewhere in the quiet of that motel room, I realized something that made everything worse and somehow better. At the same time, the answer mattered, but only later. Right now, I just needed to survive. But before I could do anything else, I needed to understand. And as I lay there in the darkness, the memories began to come. Not all at once, that would have been too much. They came in pieces, fragments, moments I'd forgotten or tried to forget. Small signs, red flags that seemed innocent at the time. The way she'd handled money, the way she looked at Vivian, the conversations that didn't quite add up. It started with the first time she mentioned inheritance. We were at dinner some nice place in Scottsdale. Not expensive, but nice enough. And Sophia had asked me about my will. Just casually. Just slipped it into the conversation between the salad and the main course. You have one, right? She'd asked. A will? I'd said yes, even though I didn't, not really. I'd said yes, and I'd watched her smile. That particular smile. the one that meant she was already thinking ahead. And I realized, lying in that motel room at 3:47 in the morning, that smile had been there from the beginning. I just hadn't known how to read it. 5 days before that night in the garage, I should have seen what was coming. But I was too busy being happy. Too busy thinking I'd finally found the right person. Too busy being blind. We were in the kitchen on a Sunday evening. Sophia was making pasta, something she did when she wanted to have what she called important conversations. Always with food, always with wine, always when she knew I'd be relaxed enough to say yes to anything. I'd learned this pattern over time, though not fast enough to recognize it for what it was, a setup. "You know what I was thinking," she said, stirring the sauce with the kind of focused attention you usually only see in people who are performing attention. The kitchen was warm. The smell of garlic and basil filled the space. Everything felt intimate. Everything felt like home. "What's that?" I asked from my seat at the table, already knowing I was walking into something. "You've been working so hard for so long," she continued, not turning around. "When was the last time you actually relaxed? When was the last time you just existed, without worrying about every little detail?" I watched her move around our kitchen. And yes, even then, I was thinking of it as our kitchen, as if ownership could be proven by feelings, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not alarm exactly. More like a warning light flickering on a dashboard I didn't know how to read. "I mean it," she said, finally turning to face me with a glass of wine in her hand. She sat across from me, and her expression was gentle, concerned, loving. Everything a wife should look like when she's talking to her husband. "You're always worried about money, always checking accounts, always managing everything. It exhausts me just watching you." There it was, the hook hidden in the bait. "I hadn't realized you were exhausted," I said carefully. "Not exhausted by you," she clarified, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her fingers were warm from holding the wine glass. "Exhausted for you. I hate seeing you stressed. I hate that you carry all this weight alone." Alone. As if I'd been carrying this weight alone before she came into my life. As if her presence was somehow a gift, rather than a transaction I hadn't yet understood the terms of. "What are you saying?" I asked. Sophia withdrew her hand and smiled. It was the kind of smile that seems genuine in the moment, but becomes sinister in hindsight, the kind that makes you wonder if every smile you've ever seen is actually a predator's performance. "I'm saying," she said slowly, "why don't you let me handle it? The bills, the accounts, everything. You work so hard, let me take care of the financial side. That way you can just relax, be present, be happy." It sounded reasonable. It sounded loving. It sounded like something a wife would say to take pressure off her husband. But somewhere deep in my gut, something cold woke up. A small voice that whispered, "This is a test. This is a trap. This is the moment you either hold the line or lose your ground." I ignored it. I'd spent 5 years rebuilding after my first marriage fell apart. I'd spent 5 years being alone. I was tired of being alone. And here was this woman, beautiful, articulate, seemingly devoted, asking me to trust her. How could I say no? How could I choose my paranoia over my hope? "Okay," I said. "Sure, if that helps." I didn't realize in that moment that I was handing her the keys to everything. It started small. The joint checking account. That seemed reasonable. That seemed like what married people did. Then she suggested we consolidate the savings. "Easier to manage," she'd said. Then the credit card. Then the emergency fund I'd built up over years of overtime and sacrifice. Each request seemed small. Each one was presented as practical, efficient, loving. Each one felt like a tiny compromise that I was willing to make because I loved her. By the time she had access to everything, I wasn't even signing the statements anymore. I'd stopped checking the balances. She'd convinced me, or perhaps I'd convinced myself, that worrying about money was a character flaw, a sign of paranoia. Better to trust. Better to believe that this woman whom I'd married had my interests at heart. Except trust, I learned, is what happens when you stop paying attention. And control is what happens when someone realizes you've stopped paying attention. It was maybe a week after she'd taken full control of the accounts that Derek noticed something was wrong. We were in his garage. Derek's always working on something, always has a wrench or a wrench set within arm's reach. He's a mechanic, third generation, real hands-on guy. He can read a person the way he reads an engine, breaking them down into component parts and understanding how everything works together. He was reading me like I was making a sound I couldn't hear. "You good man?" he asked, leaning under the hood of a pickup truck he was working on. The truck was old, maybe from the 90s, the kind of vehicle that most people would have sent to a junkyard, but Derek could resurrect. "Yeah, I'm good," I said. "Oh, why would you ask?" He was quiet for a minute, just working. His hands moved with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of practice. Then, without looking up, "Be careful with her, buddy. I'm saying this real careful because you're my friend, but just be careful." I laughed, actually laughed, like he'd just told me a joke about a priest and a rabbi walking into a bar. "She's my wife, Derek," I said. "What are you talking about?" He finally looked up at me, wiping his hands on a rag that had probably never been clean in its entire existence. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger or judgment. It was sadness. It was the look of someone who'd watched someone else walk off a cliff and couldn't do anything but stand at the top and yell warnings that wouldn't be heard. "I'm just saying," he said, going back to the truck. "I've seen what she's capable of. That's all. I've known what she's capable of. So just be careful with that one." There was something in the way he said known, something past tense, something intimate in a way that made me suddenly aware that Derek wasn't just speaking from general concern, he was speaking from experience, specific experience. "What are you talking about?" I pushed. "What do you know about Sophia?" He didn't answer. He just kept working, and no matter how many times I asked, no matter how much I pushed, Derek just shook his head and kept his eyes on the engine. Whatever he'd seen in Sophia, whatever history he had with her, he wasn't going to spell it out for me. Maybe he knew I wouldn't believe him anyway. Maybe he'd learned a long time ago that warnings don't work on people who are already in love. And he was right on both counts, lying in that motel room 5 days later, because that's how quickly everything had fallen apart. Just 5 days between Derek's warning and the moment I heard Vivian say, "The brakes are ready." His words came back to me like a ghost that had been waiting for the right moment to materialize. I've known what she's capable of. God, I'd been so stupid, so blind, so convinced that love was enough to protect me from seeing what was right in front of my face. And Derek, loyal, quiet. Derek had tried to warn me, had known something about Sophia that went deeper than just watching her manipulate her current husband. He'd experienced it. I lay there in the dark, and I thought about Derek's eyes. That sadness, that knowing. The way he'd said, "I've known," instead of just, "I know." He'd seen something in Sophia that I'd been too blind to see. Something about her nature, her capability, her potential for something darker than just financial control. And the question that kept spinning in my head as I stared at the ceiling of that motel room was what had happened between them. What had Sophia done to Derek that made him look at me with such resignation? What else had my friend seen in my wife that I was still too blind to understand? 2 days before that night in the garage, Vivian made her move. And that's when I understood that this wasn't about money anymore. Money was just the tool. This was about something darker, something that had been planned long before I was smart enough to see it coming. She cornered me in the hallway outside my bedroom. Not by accident, I'd learn later to recognize when Vivian was hunting for a private moment. She was wearing casual clothes, her hair down, everything about her carefully constructed to look innocent, young, harmless. "Dad," she said, and she used that word with a kind of mock affection that made my skin crawl. "We need to talk." I knew better than to follow her into a closed room. Instinct. The same instinct that had whispered in the kitchen 5 days earlier screamed at me. But I was so tired of ignoring my instincts. So I stepped into her room and she closed the door behind us. "If you don't help me with access to the money," Vivian said, sitting on her bed with the kind of casual confidence that belongs to someone who knows they hold all the power, "I'm going to tell everyone you molested me." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They were English, but they might as well have been in a language I'd never learned. My brain couldn't parse them, didn't want to parse them. This was my stepdaughter. This was a girl I'd helped raise. This was someone I'd loved. "Vivian," I said slowly, "that's not true." She smiled. It was a small smile, almost private, like she was enjoying a joke I wasn't in on. "Doesn't matter. Nobody's going to believe you anyway. I'm young. I'm innocent looking. You're just some old guy that my mom married. You think anyone's going to take your word over mine?" I stood there in her room, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Not in a metaphorical way. I actually felt physically unbalanced, like the room was tilting, and I was the only thing that wasn't moving correctly. "Vivian, you know that's not true," I said. "You know that." "I know," she said, swinging her legs slightly, not looking at me. "But it doesn't matter what I know. It matters what I can make people believe. And I can make them believe anything." She said it with such casual certainty that I understood she wasn't bluffing. This wasn't a scared kid making a desperate threat. This was someone, and it terrified me to realize this someone who had already planned this. Someone who had already thought through the consequences and decided she could live with them. "I'm going to talk to Sophia," I said. "Go ahead," Vivian said, and now she was smiling fully. "See what she says?" I left her room and I found Sophia in the kitchen. She was doing something on her phone, something that required her full attention. But when I walked in, she didn't look surprised. She just looked prepared, like she'd been waiting for this conversation. "Vivian just threatened me," I said. "She said if I don't give her access to the accounts, she's going to tell people I molested her." I watched Sophia's face. I was looking for shock, for anger at her daughter, for some indication that this was as insane to her as it was to me. What I got instead was a look, not a word, not a reaction, just a look that said, "This is what I've set in motion, and you can't do anything about it." In that moment, something shifted in my understanding of my entire marriage. Everything suddenly made sense. The financial control, Derek's warning, Sophia's careful movements, the way she'd positioned herself and Vivian and me in a configuration where they held all the power and I held none. This wasn't about money. Well, money was part of it. But the real issue was that I'd become a liability, a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be removed. "You're not going to do anything about this," Sophia said quietly. "It wasn't a question, because you know what happens if you do. You know how this ends." And she was right. I did know. Any accusation I made against Vivian would be met with Vivian's counter-accusation. Any attempt to protect myself would be viewed as an attack on a young girl. The system, the social system, the legal system, the family system was structured in a way that made me utterly powerless. I walked away. What else could I do? That night, lying in bed next to Sophia, I didn't sleep. I lay there and I replayed the last 5 days in my mind, like I was watching a movie I'd already seen, but was seeing for the first time. The financial control, Derek's warning, the inheritance comment, and now this, the escalation. It was a pattern, a deliberate, calculated pattern. In the dark of our bedroom, with Sophia sleeping beside me like nothing had happened, I finally understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't a family dispute. This wasn't a marriage gone wrong. This was a calculated plan to eliminate me, to get rid of me in a way that would leave Sophia and Vivian blameless, to make me the villain in a story I hadn't written. And they were patient. They were methodical. They were going to take their time systematically removing my options until I had nowhere to go, until I was cornered so completely that I'd either have to agree to anything they asked or something worse. Lying in that motel room 2 days later, staring at the ceiling at 3:47 in the morning, I could finally see it. All the pieces. The threats escalating, the timetable accelerating, the way they'd moved from subtle control to overt extortion to something I couldn't even name yet. But I was starting to understand what came next. Financial control check, threats and blackmail check. The next logical step in their plan would be the thing I'd heard in the garage. The thing Vivian had said so calmly, so matter-of-factly, like she was ordering a coffee. The brakes are ready. We just need him to drive tomorrow. That's when all the pieces locked together. Not just financial exploitation, not just blackmail, murder, plain and simple. They'd decided I was worth more dead than alive. They'd decided that eliminating me was easier than controlling me. And they'd planned it meticulously. The sun came up at 6:17 a.m. in Phoenix in December, and I was still awake to watch it. I hadn't slept. Not for 1 second. My eyes had closed a few times. My body had pretended to rest, but my mind never stopped running. It cycled through the same loop over and over, Vivian's voice saying, "The brakes are ready." Sophia's silent look of complicity. Derek's sad eyes from a week ago warning me about something I was too blind to see. And underneath it all, the terrifying clarity that two people who shared a house with me had decided I should be dead. The motel room was still dark, but through the thin curtains, I could see the sky shifting from black to deep purple to the pale gold that Phoenix gets in the early morning before the real heat sets in. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in the clothes I'd worn yesterday, my phone in my hand. I'd been holding it for the last 3 hours, staring at Derek's contact information, my thumb hovering over the call button. But I couldn't call him yet. If I called the police right now, they'd ask me questions. Logical questions. Questions I couldn't answer without sounding insane. Why did you drive to a motel instead of coming straight to the station? Why didn't you call us immediately? How do you know for certain that what you overheard was a genuine threat and not just a joke? And while I was trying to explain myself, Sophia would be calling them too. She'd be crying, probably. She'd be telling them that I'd been acting paranoid for months, that I'd been controlling with money, that I'd been inappropriate with Vivian, that I'd run away to a motel because I was unstable. By the time the police got to the house, she'd have already painted me as the villain in her own story. She'd have already taken control of the narrative. I'd lose. The system isn't built to protect men like me. It's built on assumptions. And in this case, the assumptions would all work against me. But if I had evidence, real, physical, undeniable evidence, then the police couldn't ignore me. Then Sophia's story wouldn't matter, because the facts would be screaming louder than her lies. The brakes. If they were cut, and I was absolutely certain they were cut, then that was evidence. Not circumstantial, not he said, she said. Physical proof that someone had deliberately sabotaged a vehicle. That someone had planned with deliberation and intent to cause harm. But I couldn't check the brakes myself. I didn't have the knowledge. I could look at them, and not see what I was looking for. And even if I found something, the police would need an expert to confirm it. They'd need someone credible, someone who knew vehicles. They'd need Derek. I thought about my oldest friend, Derek Richardson, who'd been warning me about Sophia before I'd even married her, who'd tried to tell me what he'd seen, what he'd known, and I'd dismissed him. Derek, who worked with his hands and read people the way I read instruction manuals, carefully, methodically, missing nothing. Derek, who was the only person in my life besides Morris who I could actually trust. And Derek had a history with Sophia. That was the thing I'd finally understood lying awake in this motel room. When he'd said, "I've known what she's capable of," he hadn't meant it theoretically. He'd meant it personally. He'd experienced something with Sophia that had made him pull back, made him cautious, made him try to protect me even when I didn't want protecting. He'd understand. He'd believe me. And most importantly, he'd know how to check the truck. But I couldn't call him at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning with a story like this. He'd think I was having a breakdown. Or worse, he'd think I was so scared that I needed him to fix it for me, that I was too weak to handle this on my own. And Derek respects strength, respects self-reliance. Even in a crisis, especially in a crisis, Derek would need to see that I wasn't just panicking. I needed to wait. I needed to let some time pass. I needed to present this to him calmly, strategically, when I could show him that I'd thought it through, that I had a plan. The waiting was the hard part, though. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was higher now, maybe 6:30, and the Phoenix sky was turning that pale blue that means it's going to be hot. Already I could feel the temperature rising. The asphalt in the parking lot was starting to shimmer. A couple of cars passed on Route 4, people heading to early shifts at jobs that required them to be somewhere at a specific time. Normal people doing normal things. I wasn't normal anymore. I couldn't be. I was a man hiding in a motel room, knowing that my wife wanted to kill me, knowing that my stepdaughter had the coldness to make it happen, knowing that the only way out was to gather evidence and pray that the system would protect me when the time came. I looked at my phone. 6:31 a.m. I could call Derek at 8 a.m. That would be reasonable. People were awake by 8 a.m. But would he be working Saturday mornings? He often went to his garage early, got a head start on the week. If I called him at the garage, he'd wonder why I wasn't asking to meet him there. If he agreed to help me get the truck, he'd want to know why we couldn't just tow it to his place directly. I needed to wait until evening. I needed to be able to tell him that I wanted to meet him somewhere private, somewhere away from the house, somewhere that wouldn't look suspicious to Sophia. The longest day of my life was starting, and I'd barely made it through the first hour. I lay back down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The air conditioning rattled on and off. Someone's door slammed in another room. Route 4 traffic hummed in the distance like the heartbeat of a city that didn't know or care that I was here planning the survival of my own life. Patience, that's what it came down to. Not fear, not desperation, not the urge to act immediately because waiting felt like drowning. It came down to patience. Patience is my tool. I'd said it to myself at 3 a.m. looking at a motel bathroom mirror. I'd meant it then. I had to keep meaning it now. Because calling Derek in a panic would undermine everything. Acting desperate would make him doubt me. And I couldn't afford for Derek to doubt me. I couldn't afford for anyone to doubt me. I needed to be calm, strategic, in control of my own story before I asked anyone else to believe it. So I waited. I held my phone, and I watched the Arizona sun climb higher. I thought about Derek in his garage working on vehicles, unaware that by tonight, his world was going to shift. That by tonight, he'd be part of something that would change everything. And I waited for evening to come. At 1 p.m. I called Derek. The phone rang 3 times. 3 times where I questioned whether I was making a mistake. 3 times where I considered hanging up and trying to figure this out alone. 3 times where every doubt I had about telling another human being this insane story came back to haunt me. Derek answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, man," he said, his voice already cautious. Derek's the kind of person who reads tone the way I read instruction manuals. "You okay?" I wasn't okay. And the moment I opened my mouth to speak, I knew he could hear it. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate need for someone to believe me. "Derek," I said, and my voice cracked like I was a teenager again. "I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you won't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I'm ready." There was a pause. A real one. The kind where you can feel the other person's attention sharpening, focusing on you like a spotlight. "Victor," he said slowly, "what the hell is going on? You're scaring me." I took a breath. I'd rehearsed this in my head all day. Rehearsed it while staring at the motel ceiling, while watching the Phoenix sky change colors, while every minute felt like an hour. But saying it out loud was different. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking it never could. "Sophia and Vivian," I said. "They're planning to kill me. They cut the brake line on my truck." The silence that followed was the longest silence of my life. It stretched out like something living, something that could expand infinitely. I could hear traffic in the background where Derek was. He must have still been at his garage working late on something. I could hear the ping of metal, the distant sound of a radio. Normal sounds. The sound of a normal life that I was about to drag into something deeply abnormal. "Oh God," Derek said finally. His voice had changed. There was recognition in it. Terrible, awful recognition. "Oh God, not again." "What do you mean, again?" I asked. "Derek, what are you talking about?" He didn't answer immediately. I could hear him moving, maybe closing the garage bay. His breathing was controlled, but I could hear the effort it took to control it. "Victor," he said, and his voice was different now. Lower. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Before you married her. Before any of this." "Okay," I said carefully. "Tell me." "I dated Sophia," Derek said. "Years ago, before you even knew her. Before you met her. And I found out what she really is." My brain struggled to process this. Derek, my oldest friend. Derek and Sophia. The timeline didn't make sense at first, and then it did. And then it made too much sense. "How long ago?" I asked. 8 years, Derek said. Maybe 9. Long enough that I'd almost convinced myself it didn't happen the way I remember it. But now, he trailed off. Now I'm remembering it very clearly. "What happened?" I asked. Derek took a long breath. "She was different back then. Younger. We dated for maybe 3 months. And somewhere in those 3 months, I realized that nothing she told me was true. Nothing. The way she talked about her ex-husband, she had this smile when she talked about him, like she was enjoying his suffering. The way she talked about money, like it was the only thing that mattered. And then I realized something else." "What?" I pressed. "She was testing me," Derek said. "Every day was a test. How much of her bullshit would I tolerate? How far could she push me? How much control could she take before I pushed back? And when I finally did push back, when I finally said I wasn't going to let her manage my finances the way she wanted, she came at me with something. An accusation. Said I'd done something I didn't do. Said I'd hurt her in a way that would destroy me if she told people." My stomach dropped. Sexual abuse accusation. "Among other things," Derek said, and there was real anger in his voice now. The anger of someone who'd carried this for years and never been able to talk about it. "The point is, I understood then. I understood what she was, and I got out. I ended it, and I spent the next 8 years watching her move through men's lives like a predator. That's why you warned me, I said. That's why I warned you, Derek confirmed. But you were in love, and I couldn't make you see it. I couldn't make you understand what I'd seen. So I watched. I waited. And I tried to be ready in case you finally figured it out. And I finally figured it out, I said. But it's worse than what happened to you. She's escalated, Derek said. It wasn't a question. She's planning to kill me, I said. To Derek, they've already cut the brakes. They're waiting for me to drive. They've already planned how to make it look like an accident. Another silence. This one was different. This one was Derek calculating. Derek understanding not just what had happened to me, but what it meant. I'm going to help you, Derek said finally. His voice was steady now. Calm, professional almost. And we're going to make sure she never does this to anyone again. Do you understand me? Not just stops. Never does this again. How? I asked. So Derek said, we need evidence, real physical evidence. We need to document what's been done to that truck. We need to have someone who knows vehicles, someone credible verify that the brakes have been deliberately cut. And we need to do it without Sophia knowing. I can't go home, I said. No. Derek agreed. You can't. Tomorrow morning you come to my garage. Don't go home. Don't try to get your things. Don't talk to Sophia or Vivian. You just come straight to me. Can you do that? Yes, I said. Good, Derek said. Come at 7 a.m. before anyone's awake. And Victor. Yeah. I have an idea, he said. A way to protect you. A way to make sure that when this goes to the police, when this goes to court, there's nothing she can do to twist it or control it. I have to think it through, but I have an idea. I hung up the phone, and I sat there in the dark motel room, and for the first time since I'd heard Vivian's voice in the garage, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope exactly. Hope seemed too fragile for what I was dealing with. But something like relief. Something like the knowledge that I wasn't alone in this anymore. Derek believed me. More than that, Derek understood me. He'd walked through something similar. He'd survived Sophia, and he was willing to stand next to me while I tried to survive her too. The motel air conditioning rattled on and off. Route 4 traffic continued its endless hum. Somewhere in Scottsdale, Sophia was probably sleeping soundly in our bed, confident that by tomorrow night I'd be dead. Somewhere in the same house, Vivian was probably sleeping the sleep of the young and certain secure, in the knowledge that their plan was perfect. They didn't know that I'd spent the night with Derek's voice in my ear planning. They didn't know that the man they thought they'd eliminated had just gained an ally who understood exactly what they were capable of. They didn't know, and by the time they found out, it would be too late. For the first time in 36 hours, I felt like I might actually survive this. Derek's garage sat on the east side of Phoenix, in an industrial area where businesses operated on their own schedule, and nobody asked questions about why cars showed up at odd hours. The space was exactly what I expected: workbenches covered with tools, hydraulic lifts, vehicles in various states of repair. The smell of motor oil and metal was comforting in a way I didn't expect, like being inside something honest. Derek was on his phone when I walked in at 7:45 a.m. Yeah, I'm looking to get a truck towed. He was saying, his voice steady and professional. A 2015 F-150. There's a brake problem safety issue. Yeah, we need it moved ASAP. He paused, listening. The truck is at my friend's house, East Scottsdale. I'm authorized to arrange the tow. We need it here at my garage. I watched him give my address to the dispatcher. The address of the house where Sophia was probably still asleep, probably still planning my death with Vivian. The house where my truck sat in the driveway, waiting for me to make one more mistake. "Within the hour that works," Derek said, and hung up. He turned to me and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a man gives you when you're about to walk into battle, and he's about to hand you a weapon. "You good?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm ready." "That's all that matters," Derek said. He walked over to one of his workbenches and pulled up a stool next to an old wooden chair, his workspace. "Come here. I need to explain something." I sat down, and he pointed to a diagram he'd apparently drawn while waiting for me. A brake line. A detailed sketch. "If your brakes are cut," Derek said slowly, "there will be evidence. Clean cuts, not wear, not rust. No way for your wife to hide what she's done. The cable will show exactly what happened." "But what if the tow truck driver sees it?" I asked. "That's why we're getting it here," Derek said, gesturing around his garage. "Private space. I can examine it properly, document everything, take photos. Preserve the evidence so that when you take it to police or to court, there's no way anyone can claim the damage happened after the tow." I nodded. It made sense. Derek had thought this through. Derek wasn't just helping. He was protecting me legally and physically. We waited. Derek made coffee, bad coffee, the kind you make in a garage with water that's been sitting in a tank for too long. But I drank it because it gave me something to do with my hands. Because waiting is harder than action, and I was trying to distract myself from the fact that in a few minutes, I was going to take the one piece of physical evidence between my wife and murder and remove it from her reach. At 8:03 a.m., Casey pulled up in his tow truck. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of weathered face that comes from working in the Arizona sun. He didn't ask questions. That was the thing about the towing business: you learn not to ask questions. You just show up, secure the vehicle, and move on. Derek walked out to meet him, and they talked for maybe 2 minutes. I watched through the garage window as Derek pointed to the F-150 in my driveway, shown on his phone photos apparently, and Casey nodded. Professional. Routine. The tow truck backed into the driveway of my house. The house where Sophia was still asleep. The house where Vivian was still dreaming about my funeral. The house where everything I'd built over 8 years was being packed into a vehicle that wasn't mine anymore. Casey hooked up the F-150 with practiced efficiency. The winch engaged, the cable tightened, and slowly my truck rose up off the ground, just inches at first, then more. The front end lifted. The rear wheels left the pavement. The truck swayed slightly as Casey adjusted the tension, and then it was fully suspended, hanging from cables, like something caught between worlds. I felt something shift in my chest. That truck was my escape route. That truck was also the murder weapon Sophia had prepared. And now it was being taken to Derek's garage, where Derek would examine every inch of it and document what had been done. There was no turning back from this. I understood that now. Casey drove slowly, carefully, 18 miles from my house to Derek's garage, with my F-150 suspended behind him. Derek watched from the garage entrance, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. When Casey finally pulled in and began the process of lowering the truck onto Derek's lift, Derek came over and stood next to me. "No turning back now," he said quietly. "I know," I said. "Your wife's going to wake up," Derek continued. "She's going to go to the driveway, and the truck's going to be gone. She's going to panic. She's going to call you. She's going to wonder what happened. And panic." Derek paused and looked at me. Panic makes people do stupid things. Things they haven't thought through. Things that leave evidence. I watched as Casey released the cables and the F-150 settled onto Derek's lift. The truck that was supposed to kill me was now in the hands of a man who understood exactly what had been done to it. In the hands of a man who had survived Sophia himself and understood the price of her rage. "She's probably waking up right now," I said. "Probably," Derek agreed. "She's probably noticing the truck is gone. She's probably wondering what went wrong with the plan. And she's probably about to make the first mistake." He walked over to the truck and circled it, his eyes moving over every detail. His mechanic's eye, his trained eye, the eye of someone who can read what a vehicle is telling him about its history. "Pop the hood," Derek said to Casey, who'd stuck around to help Derek secure the truck properly. Casey popped the hood. Derek leaned in, studying the engine compartment, and then he went underneath, rolling on a creeper beneath the front end where the brake lines ran. I didn't follow him under there. I stood in the garage with Casey, and I waited, and I thought about Sophia waking up. I thought about her going to the window and seeing the empty driveway. I thought about her calling my phone, which I wasn't answering. I thought about her trying to figure out what had gone wrong. I thought about how in the next few hours everything was going to change. The game she thought she was winning was about to shift. The evidence she thought was hidden was about to become visible. The plan she thought was perfect was about to reveal its cracks. And it was all because Derek had understood something fundamental. Sometimes the best defense isn't running. Sometimes it's letting your enemy panic enough to make a mistake. Derek rolled back out from under the truck. His face was grim. "It's cut," he said simply. "Clean cut. Deliberate. No question. This was planned." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw confirmation of something I'd already known. But knowing it and having it confirmed by an expert were two different things. One was fear, the other was evidence. "Now we document it," Derek said. "And then we take it to the police." Derek didn't waste a second. The moment the tow truck pulled out, he'd grabbed a flashlight, one of those expensive LED ones that mechanics use, and slid under the F-150 on a creeper. "Come here," he called out to me, his voice echoing slightly under the truck's chassis. "Bring yourself down here." I lay down on the creeper next to him, and Derek tilted the flashlight so I could see what he was looking at. The brake line was right there. A simple piece of tubing, the kind that's easy to ignore until you understand what it's supposed to do. The brake line is the artery of the system. Cut the artery and the whole thing bleeds out. Cut the brake line while someone's going 60 miles an hour downhill, and the results are predetermined. "Look," Derek said quietly, pointing the flashlight at a specific spot on the line. "There and there. You see that? I saw it. A clean cut. Not a rough edge from wear or corrosion. Not the jagged separation of a line that had failed under stress. This was a deliberate, professional cut. The kind of cut you make when you know exactly what you're doing." "That's a tubing cutter," Derek said, his voice still quiet but with something hard in it. "Someone took a tool, probably a tubing cutter, or maybe a good pair of cutting pliers, and cut straight through. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't negligence. This was planned." He pointed the flashlight along the length of the brake line, showing me other cuts. Multiple places. Not just one failure point, but several. Redundancy. Making absolutely certain that no matter what happened, the brakes would fail completely. "They wanted to make sure," Derek said. "They didn't want you limping to a stop. They wanted complete system failure." We lay there under the truck for maybe 5 more minutes while Derek examined every inch of the brake system. His hands moved with practiced precision, checking connections, looking for additional damage, making sure he understood the full scope of what had been done. Then he rolled back out. I followed him, and when I emerged from under the truck and stood up, Derek's face was the color of old concrete. Not pale exactly. Drained. Like someone had reached into his chest and pulled something essential out. It's cut, he said simply. Victor, it's cut. Multiple places, clean cuts. Very deliberate, very professional. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. The word professional hung in the air between us like something poisonous. If I'd been driving, I said slowly, and the brakes failed at highway speed. Derek didn't want to answer. I could see it in his face. He didn't want to imagine it or explain it, but he owed me the truth. You wouldn't make it past the first turn, he said finally. His voice was steady, but there was something ancient in it, something that had been waiting years to be spoken. You'd go into the curve brake, wouldn't respond, and you'd go through the guardrail. You'd be dead before your brain registered what was happening. Not if you crashed. Not if you got hurt. Dead. Immediate death. The kind of certainty that only comes from someone who understands mechanics well enough to know exactly what failure looks like. Something shifted in me then. The fear that had driven me for 2 days. The fear that had made me run. That had made me hide. That had made me rely on Derek transformed into something else. Anger. Real anger. The kind that's cold and clear and doesn't make mistakes. She knew what she was doing, I said. Yeah, Derek said. He walked over to his workbench and set the flashlight down. She did. I know she did because I've seen what she's capable of. He ran a hand through his hair, and I could see something shift in him too. Some old memory working its way to the surface. When I was with Sophia, Derek said she had a type, a pattern. She'd find a guy who had money or potential or something she could use. She'd move in, take control of his finances, make herself indispensable. And then, he paused. And then when she got bored, or when he figured out what she was doing, she'd leave. But she'd make sure he was destroyed on the way out. What do you mean destroyed? I asked, but I already knew. I had money when we started dating, Derek said. Not a lot, but enough. Sophia convinced me to let her manage it, told me I was terrible with finances, that I needed her help. I believed her because she was charming and she made it sound like love. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd moved half of it. And when I tried to stop her, she came at me with an accusation. Said I'd done something to her, something that would have destroyed me if she'd told anyone. He looked at me. But I got lucky, Derek said. My family believed me. I had a lawyer. I got her out of my life before things escalated beyond that. But Victor, he shook his head. With you, she escalated. The control over finances, the blackmail threat. And now this. This is beyond money now. This is elimination. Why? I asked. Why would she escalate with me? Because you have more, Derek said simply. More money than I did. More assets. More estate value. And because you're trying to figure her out, which makes you dangerous to her. With me, it was just about taking what she could get. With you, it's about making sure you never become a problem. I understood then. This wasn't a marriage gone wrong. This wasn't even a calculated theft. This was a predator who'd recognized that her prey was waking up to what she was, and she'd decided the only solution was to remove the prey permanently. We need to call the police, I said. Derek nodded. Yes, but not yet. What do you mean, not yet? I said. Derek, she tried to kill me. I know, Derek said. He was already moving toward his camera, a professional-grade DSLR, that he used to document vehicle repairs. But if we just call the police with your word, and my word, she'll tell them a different story. She'll say you're paranoid. She'll say I'm helping you because I'm jealous. She'll say Vivian was just joking around and you took it too seriously. She'll twist every single thing we say and make you look like the crazy ex-husband. He started setting up lights around the truck. Professional lighting, the kind you'd use to photograph evidence. First, we document everything, Derek said. We take photographs, detailed photographs, measurements. We record exactly what we found and exactly how we found it. We make this so airtight, so undeniable, that when we walk into a police station, the evidence speaks louder than any story she can tell. He looked at me. That's how we make sure she can't twist this, Derek said. That's how we make sure that when the police look at these breaks, there's no room for doubt, no room for her narrative. Just facts. He started shooting. Close-ups of the cuts. Wide shots of the brake line system. Measurements, lighting angles that showed the deliberate nature of the damage. And with each photograph, I felt something solidify inside me. Not just certainty that Sophia had tried to kill me, I'd already known that, but certainty that there was a way to prove it, a way to stop her, a way to make sure she couldn't do to anyone else what she'd done to Derek, what she'd tried to do to me. How long, I asked. How long until we go to the police? A couple hours, Derek said, still shooting. I want to get every angle. I want to make sure that when they see this, when they examine this truck themselves, they find exactly what I found. No surprises. No room for her to claim the damage happened after the tow. He lowered the camera and looked at me. And Victor, he said, when we walk into that police station, you're not walking in alone. I'm going with you, and I'm going to tell them exactly what I found under this truck and exactly why someone would do it. For the first time since I'd heard Vivian's voice in the garage, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, and anger, I was learning, was much more useful than fear. Derek finished the photos around 11:30 a.m. Every angle documented. Time-stamped video with the garage clock visible in frame. Every cut, every piece of sabotage, every detail that proved someone had deliberately cut the brakes on my truck. He'd been methodical, professional, the way he approached everything. The way you approach something when you understand that documentation might be the difference between justice and getting away with murder. Now we need a lawyer, Derek said, wiping his hands on a rag. Not just any lawyer. Patricia Klein. She's the best in Phoenix for cases like this. He made the call right there, still standing in his garage with my F-150 suspended on the lift above us, like a piece of evidence waiting to speak its truth. Patricia, Derek said when she picked up, I have a client who needs emergency legal consultation. Attempted murder. Not a failed attempt, an interrupted attempt. They need help building a case before going to the police. There was a pause on the other end. Then Patricia agreed to meet them at 12:30 p.m. at her office. Patricia Klein turned out to be a woman in her 50s, with gray streaking through her dark hair, and the kind of presence that fills a room without trying. She listened to the entire story from the garage to the brake line, to Derek's history with Sophia, to Vivian's blackmail threat. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, and when we were done, she nodded. You did the right thing, Patricia said. Now we build an airtight case. We document everything. We establish a timeline. We identify every witness. And we make sure that when we walk into a police station, they don't have any choice but to take this seriously. Patricia's strategy was precise. First, we'd have to make a report, but strategically. We'd control what information went to police in what order with what evidence. We'd establish the timeline when the threat was made, when the truck was sabotaged, when the evidence was discovered. We'd preserve the chain of custody for every piece of evidence. Stepdaughter. The video from Derek's documentation, Patricia said, pulling out a notebook. Time-stamped. Professional. That goes into the formal police report. The truck itself, chain of custody from the tow. The garage is now a secure location for evidence. When police arrive to photograph the truck, they'll find exactly what Derek found. Officer Richardson and Officer Mitchell showed up at Derek's garage at 2:15 p.m. They were professional, efficient, asking the right questions. Richardson was older, maybe mid-50s, with the kind of weathered face that comes from 25 years on the Phoenix police force. Mitchell was younger, sharper, the kind of cop who understood that details mattered. They photographed the truck from every angle. Official police documentation. They took measurements. They examined the brake line themselves, and when Richardson finally rolled back out from under the truck, he looked at Derek and me with the expression of someone who'd just had their suspicions confirmed. "This is sabotage," he said simply. No question. This was deliberate. Mitchell was already calling it in, documenting the vehicle as evidence in an attempted murder investigation. But the real break came from Morris. Derek's friend had been searching for the hardware store video, the surveillance footage from wherever Vivian had bought the tubing cutter. It took time. It took calling multiple stores. It took Morris working his contacts. But by 2:45 p.m., he'd found it. The timestamp on the video showed Vivian entering the hardware store 2 days before the garage incident. She was calm, methodical. She knew exactly what she was looking for. She went straight to the section where the tubing cutters were kept, picked one up, paid for it in cash, and left. Then 10 minutes later, Sophia walked into the same store. She didn't buy anything. She just walked around looking at the aisles, looking, Patricia said, like someone confirming that her daughter had completed the first part of the plan. "That's participation," Patricia said, watching the video on my phone. "That's knowledge. That's complicity. They knew what they were doing, and they knew it together." The evidence was building into something undeniable. Patricia then brought up something else. "We need to find Richard," she said. Vivian's biological father, Sophia's ex-husband. If she's done this before. "She has," Derek said quietly. "She's done this before." "Then Richard will know," Patricia said, "and he'll testify." It took Morris another hour, but he found Richard through financial records, divorce proceedings, child support payments. Richard was living in California now, had remarried, had built a life far away from Sophia. When I finally called him at 3:45 p.m., he didn't answer, but he called back within 5 minutes. "Is this about Sophia?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," I said. "What did she do?" he asked. And there was something in his voice, old pain, old anger, old recognition. I told him. I told him about the brake line, about the blackmail threat through Vivian, about Derek's warning that this was a pattern. And as I told him, Richard's breathing on the other end of the phone shifted. "That's exactly what she did to me," he said finally. "Not the brakes, but everything else. The financial control, the threats, the way she positioned me as the villain." He paused. "I'll fly to Phoenix. I'll testify. Whatever you need." By 4:00 p.m. we had everything. Derek's time-stamped documentation of the brake line, police photographs and official evidence designation, hardware store video showing Vivian buying the tubing cutter, video of Sophia entering the store 10 minutes later. A complete timeline from threat to execution to discovery. And we had Richard, someone else who'd experienced Sophia's pattern, someone who could speak to what she was capable of. The evidence was complete. The case was airtight. But as Patricia was explaining the next steps, how to approach the district attorney, how to build toward a preliminary hearing, my phone buzzed. Then Derek's. Then Patricia's. Notifications from social media. Sophia had posted something, and when we looked at it, we understood that she'd realized the truck was gone. She'd realized something had gone wrong, and she'd decided to do what she did best: control the narrative before we could. "She's panicking," Patricia said, reading the post. "And when people panic, they leave evidence." That evening, I was in Derek's garage reviewing the evidence one more time when my phone started buzzing. Not one notification, not two. A continuous stream. Text messages, calls, Notifications stacking up like a pile of debris I couldn't clear away fast enough. I kept dismissing them, but the phone kept buzzing. Derek noticed and gestured for me to check it. I opened my messages and saw patterns emerging. People I'd known for years, neighbors, co-workers, friends from church. The earliest text was from someone I'd worked with years ago. Victor, you okay? Sophia posted something about you acting weird lately. Then another from a neighbor. Dude, I think you should talk to someone. Sophia seems really concerned. Then another. Praying for your family. Whatever you're going through, stay strong. They all assumed I was the problem. Derek, I said slowly, I need to look at something. I pulled up social media and searched for Sophia's profile. I found her post almost immediately. It had been up for only a couple hours, but it already had hundreds of comments. Hundreds. The post was long, carefully written, the kind of post that gets shared because it seems vulnerable but was actually a calculated narrative. Please keep my family in your prayers during this difficult time. Victor has been under so much pressure lately, and I'm increasingly concerned about his state of mind. He's been making some very serious accusations that I know in my heart he doesn't actually believe. My daughter has been so affected by all of this. She's such a gentle soul. She would never hurt anyone. I don't know what's happening with Victor emotionally, but I'm worried. I'm worried for all of us. Below the post, hundreds of comments poured in. I scrolled through them, and with each one I felt something shift in my understanding of what was happening. This wasn't just about evidence anymore. This was about narrative. This was about who got to tell the story first. And Sophia had gotten there before I even knew I was in a race. Mrs. Brennan, a neighbor I'd seen in passing, but never really known, had commented, "We're standing with you, Sophia. You deserve so much better than this." A woman from Sophia's church had written, "Your strength is admirable. We're praying for you." A neighbor I'd nodded to at the mailbox had commented, "Victor always seemed off to me. I'm not surprised by any of this." My hands were shaking as I read, not from anger, from the realization that I was losing something I hadn't even understood I was fighting for. My reputation, my standing in the community. The simple fact that people believed me. "She's telling them I'm crazy," I said to Derek. "She's telling them I'm dangerous and unstable, and they're believing her." Derek came over and looked at the phone. He read a few of the comments, then looked back at me with something that might have been pity. "She's controlling the narrative," he said simply. But Victor, listen to me. She's also making a mistake." "What mistake?" I asked. "Everyone thinks I'm the villain." "Everyone on social media," Derek corrected. "But the people who matter, the people who will decide what happens next, aren't going to believe her posts. They're going to look at evidence. They're going to look at the brake line. They're going to look at the hardware store video. They're going to look at Richard's testimony. They're going to look at facts, not opinions." He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things. And what I was feeling as I scrolled through hundreds of comments from people in my community who now believed Sophia's narrative was a creeping certainty that I'd already lost. "But the jury," I said quietly. "The jury is made up of people, regular people. People like the ones commenting on this post." Derek didn't have an answer to that. I kept scrolling, kept reading. Sophia had posted again a follow-up to the first post. "Victor left the house yesterday without telling me where he was going. He's been disappearing. He's been obsessing over details. This is not the man I married. I'm frightened. I'm frightened for myself and for my daughter." Please, if anyone has advice for what to do when your spouse is exhibiting signs of a mental health crisis, I'm listening. Another wave of comments. More support for Sophia. More concern about Victor. More people stepping up to validate her narrative. And the worst part, she wasn't even lying. Not technically. I had left the house. I was obsessing over details. I was acting differently. But the context that I was acting this way, because my wife and stepdaughter had tried to kill me, was completely missing from her version of events. She'd taken the truth and bent it into something that made me the unstable one. "Don't keep reading," Derek said. He was standing behind me, looking over my shoulder at the screen. "It's only going to make you feel worse." "I can't help it," I said. "These are people who know me, people who've known me for years, and they're all believing her." "They're believing the first version of events," Derek said. "But Victor, that's not what matters. What matters is what a jury believes, and juries believe evidence, not social media posts." I wanted to believe him. God knows I wanted to believe him. But as I kept scrolling through post after post of support for Sophia, of people expressing concern about my mental state, of neighbors I'd nodded to in passing now, discussing whether I was a danger to my family, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already losing. The court case hadn't even started yet, and I was already the villain in most people's minds. Sophia had moved fast. She'd realized the truck was missing, and she'd immediately gone on offense. She'd created a victim narrative. She'd positioned herself as the concerned wife of a man having a mental health crisis. She'd made herself sympathetic, and it was working. "Mrs. Brennan responded to someone's comment with, "Victor seemed fine on the surface, but now I'm realizing he was always a bit cold. I always wondered about him. I'm so glad Sophia finally said something." Another neighbor chimed in. "I've always thought there was something off about him. He never smiled. He was always distant." They were rewriting history in real time. They were taking normal behaviors and retroactively assigning sinister meaning to them. They were building a narrative where I'd always been the bad guy, and Sophia had just been waiting for the courage to say something. Derek put his hand on my shoulder. "Please stop reading," he said firmly. "Victor, stop reading right now." I set the phone down, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. "She's winning," I said. "Not where it matters," Derek said. "In court, she's not winning. In evidence, she's losing. In facts, she's going down. But yes, she's winning in the court of public opinion. And that's terrifying, because you're wondering if the jury, those 12 regular people, are going to come in already believing her narrative." He was right. That was exactly what I was wondering, and I didn't have an answer. 1 week later, and I couldn't sleep. The trial would start tomorrow. I was back in a motel room, a different one this time, closer to the courthouse, and I was staring at the ceiling the same way I'd stared at it 7 days ago. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't running from something. I was running towards something, and I was terrified. My mind kept cycling through the same loops: the brake line, the tubing cutter, Derek's photographs, the hardware store video, Sophia walking in 10 minutes after Vivian, Richard's testimony, the timeline that linked everything together into a rope that couldn't be broken. But I kept coming back to one thought. What if it's not enough? What if the jury looked at all the evidence and decided it was circumstantial? What if Sophia's narrative, her carefully crafted victim story, her performance of the concerned wife, what if that resonated more than the facts? What if a jury of 12 ordinary people from Phoenix decided that they believed Sophia over the evidence? And then, what then I'd lost? Then everything Derek had done, everything Patricia had built, everything I'd risked would be for nothing. Then I'd be back where I started, but worse, because now Sophia would know that even with proof she could escape. that her story could overcome my evidence, that she could walk free while I lived with the knowledge that I'd tried and failed. Or worse than that, what if I won? What if the jury convicted Vivian? What if they charged Sophia as an accomplice? What if my evidence was airtight enough that there was no doubt then I'd won the case? But I'd lost my wife. I'd lost my home. I'd lost my reputation in the community. The social media war had already been decided against me, and no jury verdict was going to change the fact that my neighbors, my friends, people I'd known for years now believed I was crazy. I got out of bed at 2:47 a.m. and called Patricia. She answered on the second ring, which meant she wasn't really asleep either. Maybe she never slept before big trials. Maybe experienced lawyers learn to run on fear and caffeine. Patricia, I said, what if they don't believe me? What if the jury sides with Sophia? Victor. She said carefully, they're going to believe the evidence. You have material evidence. You have a timeline. You have witnesses. You have truth. But she's convincing, I said. She's so good at sounding truthful. She's so good at making people believe her. Yes, Patricia said. And that's why we have evidence instead of relying on testimony alone. Evidence doesn't lie. Evidence doesn't perform. Evidence doesn't convince. Evidence simply is. And what your evidence says is that someone cut the brakes on your truck deliberately. That's not subjective. That's not up for interpretation. I wanted to believe her. I was trying so hard to believe her. What if the jury is already prejudiced against me? I asked. What if they've already decided I'm the crazy one because of what Sophia posted on social media? Then we'll appeal, Patricia said. But Victor, you need to stop doubting yourself. You have material evidence. You have a clean cut on a brake line. You have video of your stepdaughter buying a tubing cutter and your wife arriving 10 minutes later. You have the testimony of a mechanic who understood what he was looking at. You have the testimony of a man who's already been victimized by this same woman. You have everything you need to win this case. She paused. What you don't have, Patricia continued, is the right to doubt yourself. Not now. Not tomorrow. You're going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow, and you're going to tell the truth. And I'm going to make sure that truth is heard. I hung up and I went to the window. Phoenix was still awake at 3 a.m. The city lights still burned. Traffic still moved on the streets below. The world was still turning, still moving, still operating, as if my trial tomorrow wasn't the most important event in the universe. And I realized something fundamental. It wasn't. My trial wasn't the most important thing in the universe. But it was the most important thing to me. And not because I was afraid of dying. Not because I was afraid of losing. Not because I was afraid of what Sophia would do if she won. It was because I'd realized that I was fighting for something bigger than survival. I was fighting for truth. I was fighting for the idea that you can't let someone else's lie become your narrative. I was fighting for the principle that if you see something wrong, you have to name it, even if naming it destroys everything in your life. And if I lost tomorrow, if the jury sided with Sophia, if the evidence wasn't enough, if I ended up convicted while she walked free, at least I would have tried. At least I would have stood up and said the truth. At least I would have refused to let someone else's narrative become my life. I thought about Derek. I thought about Richard flying across the country to testify. I thought about Patricia spending hours building a case that most lawyers probably wouldn't have taken. I thought about Morris finding that video. I thought about Officer Richardson and Officer Mitchell seeing the sabotage and calling it what it was. All of those people had stood with me. All of those people had looked at the evidence and chosen to believe the truth. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had to be enough. I stood at the window and I made a decision. If I lost tomorrow, I would grieve. I would be angry. I would probably spend years wondering what I could have done differently. but I would not be silent. I would not accept Sophia's narrative as my story. I would not let her version of events be the final word. Even if the jury sided with her, even if Phoenix believed her, even if I had to spend the rest of my life fighting in appeals and civil suits, I would not be silent. I would speak the truth, and I would let the world decide what to do with it. For the first time since this had all started, my hands stopped shaking. Not because I wasn't afraid anymore. I was still terrified. The fear didn't go away. It didn't magically disappear because I'd come to a realization about purpose. But something shifted. The fear was no longer in control. The fear had a purpose now. The fear was telling me that something important was at stake, and I was listening to it. I was honoring it. But I wasn't being controlled by it anymore. I lay back down on the motel bed, and I closed my eyes. Tomorrow I would walk into the courtroom. Tomorrow I would tell my story. Tomorrow I would let the evidence speak, and I would do it, knowing that whatever happened, I'd chosen truth over silence. I'd chosen to fight even when the odds were impossible. I'd chosen to speak even when speaking might destroy me. That wasn't a guarantee of winning, but it was a guarantee of not losing myself. And somehow that made all the difference. The Maricopa County Courthouse looms against the Phoenix morning, like a monument to something I don't quite understand yet. Gray concrete, heavy doors, the kind of building designed to make you feel small. Patricia walks beside me, her briefcase in one hand, her other hand briefly touching my elbow. "Remember," she says quietly, "you're not defending anything. You're just telling what you know. The evidence will do the rest." Inside the courtroom is smaller than I expected, more intimate somehow. The judge's bench sits elevated at the front, the jury box to the left, the gallery behind us, reporters, courthouse staff, curious citizens. I spot Derek in the third row. His jaw is set, his hands folded in his lap. He gives me a barely perceptible nod. Judge James Crawford enters from chambers. He's older than I expected, late 60s, maybe early 70s. His hair is gray, his expression measured. When he looks out across the courtroom, I notice something in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Something that suggests he knows exactly what kind of case this is. "All rise," the bailiff announces, and the courtroom stands. Judge Crawford takes his seat and surveys the room with deliberate care. His gaze lands on me for just a moment longer than it lands on anyone else. Then he looks toward the defense table where Vivian and Sophia sit with their attorney counsel, Bradford. Bradford is sharp-looking, expensive suit, careful grooming, the kind of lawyer who knows the system intimately. But he doesn't look comfortable. His eyes keep finding the gallery, then looking away. "This court is now in session," Judge Crawford says. His voice is steady, authoritative. "We're here regarding the case of the state versus Sophia Ashford and Vivian Ashford, charged with attempted murder in the first degree. Before we proceed, I want to establish some ground rules." He leans forward slightly. "This court recognizes the serious nature of these charges. We will hear evidence, we will hear testimony, and we will proceed with the understanding that justice requires both truth and proper procedure." Something in the way he says this, the emphasis on truth, makes me sit up straighter. Patricia stands. "Your Honor, the prosecution is ready to present its case." Judge Crawford nods. "Counsel Bradford, is the defense ready?" "We are, Your Honor." Bradford responds, though his voice carries no conviction. He doesn't look at his clients. He doesn't look at me. He's simply going through the motions of being present. Judge Crawford gestures to the jury box. "We'll now seat the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your service. You're about to hear a case involving serious criminal charges. Your responsibility is to listen to the evidence presented to apply the law as I instruct you." and to render a verdict based solely on what you hear and see in this courtroom. 12 jurors file in. They look tired, ordinary, like people pulled from their regular lives into something they never asked for. One woman in the front row has kind eyes. An older man in the back looks skeptical. A younger man keeps glancing at his watch. These are the people who will decide. Counsel. Judge Crawford addresses Patricia. You may proceed with your opening statement. Patricia stands and approaches the jury box. She doesn't use notes. She speaks directly, her voice carrying conviction without performing. This case is about pattern, she says. About how a predator operates. How someone uses love as camouflage for control. How that control escalates to financial manipulation, false accusations, and ultimately to deliberate attempted murder. She pauses, letting that land. We will present evidence. We will present testimony. And that evidence will show that Sophia Ashford and Vivian Ashford deliberately sabotaged a vehicle with the intent to kill Victor Ashford. Not in a moment of rage, not in self-defense, but as a calculated, premeditated act. When Patricia sits down, Judge Crawford turns to Bradford. Akituntitum. Counsel, would the defense like to make an opening statement? Bradford stands slowly. He looks at Vivian and Sophia, then at the jury. The defense will reserve its opening statement, he says quietly. I feel Patricia tense slightly beside me. Reserving opening statement is unusual. It's almost an admission of having no credible counter-narrative. Judge Crawford's expression doesn't change, but I notice his fingers drumming once on the bench. That small gesture tells me everything. He recognizes what Bradford is doing. He understands the implications. Very well, Judge Crawford says. Counsel, call your first witness. The prosecution calls Derek Martinez to the stand, Patricia announces. Derek stands and walks to the witness box with the same steady confidence he uses in his garage. He's dressed carefully, clean shirt, pressed pants, nothing flashy. The bailiff administers the oath. Derek raises his hand and swears to tell the truth. As Derek takes his seat, I catch Judge Crawford watching him with that same careful attention. Not suspicious, thoughtful, like he's trying to read something beneath the surface. The courtroom settles into focused silence. The trial has begun. The truth is about to be measured and weighed and tested in front of 12 strangers who will decide whether survival and justice are the same thing. I'm no longer hiding. I'm no longer running. I'm sitting in a courtroom in Phoenix, Arizona, watching evidence become testimony, become potential truth. Judge Crawford looks down at his notes, then back at Derek. You may proceed, he tells Patricia, and the machinery of justice begins to turn. The prosecution calls Victor as its first witness, Prosecutor Bennett announced. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but I walked to the witness stand with my back straight. The bailiff held out a Bible, and I placed my hand on it. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? The bailiff asked. I do, I said, and I meant it. I sat down in the witness stand, elevated above the courtroom, visible to everyone, the jury directly to my left. Judge Crawford at the bench, his eyes on me. Patricia at the defense table, confident and still. Sophia across the room, her pale face watching me with something that might have been fear or calculation. Vivian serene and untouched, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Prosecutor Bennett stood up. He was careful with his questions, methodical, building the narrative step by step. Victor, he said, when you heard your stepdaughter say those words in the garage, the brakes are ready, what did you feel? I could have given him a clinical answer. I could have said something measured and legal. But I chose the truth instead. My heart stopped, I said simply. It felt like the person I trusted most had a knife in her hand, and I didn't see it coming. I paused, searching for the right words. I felt completely alone. Like I'd just realized that the two people I'd lived with, the two people I'd built a life with, wanted me dead. The courtroom was silent. Not awkward silence. The silence of people understanding something fundamental. And after that initial shock, Bennett asked gently. I felt angry, I continued. Not at them, at myself. I was angry at being so blind, so stupid, so willing to believe that someone could love me when they were actually planning to kill me. Bennett let that sit for a moment. Then he continued with the practical questions, the timeline, the truck, the discovery at Derek's garage. By the time he finished, he'd established the entire narrative through my testimony, not as accusation, but as truth. Then came the cross-examination. Counsel Bradford stood up. He was professional, careful the way defense lawyers are trained to be. He didn't attack me. He just asked questions that suggested alternative explanations. Mr. Victor, he said, isn't it possible you misheard the conversation, that you interpreted innocent words in the context of your own fears? No, I said calmly. I heard very clearly. I know exactly what I heard. And more importantly, I know exactly who they are. Bradford tried another angle. Isn't it possible that the brake line damage was caused by normal wear and tear, that the cuts you saw were actually corrosion damage? That's when Derek took the stand. Derek walked up with the bearing of a man who'd done this 1,000 times, testified about vehicles, explained mechanical systems to people who didn't understand them. He was sworn in, and then Prosecutor Bennett began his questioning. Derek, Bennett said, you're a certified mechanic with how many years of experience? 40 years. Derek said. I've worked on every kind of vehicle. I understand brake systems better than I understand most people. And when you examined the brake line on Victor's F-150, what did you find? Derek described it in detail. The clean cuts. The precise nature of the damage. The difference between wear and deliberate sabotage. He explained how you could tell the difference, how the angles of the cuts showed intention, how corrosion would look completely different. In your professional opinion, Bennett asked, could this damage have been caused by normal wear and tear? Absolutely not, Derek said firmly. This was done with a tool. This was deliberate, and whoever did it knew what they were doing. Then Counsel Bradford cross-examined him. Mr. Derek Bradford said, isn't it true that you and Victor are close friends, that you have a bias in his favor? Derek didn't flinch. Yes, we're friends. And yes, I understand that might suggest bias. But facts don't care about friendship. The brake line was cut. That's a fact. I've examined thousands of brake lines. I know what a cut looks like versus what corrosion looks like. And this is a cut. But couldn't you be mistaken? Bradford pressed. Not about this, Derek said. And there was something in his voice, not anger, just certainty. I've spent 40 years understanding mechanical systems. I've spent the last week understanding what Sophia is capable of, because I've been through it before. So no, I'm not mistaken about this. The courtroom was silent again. That same heavy silence. After Derek stepped down, Prosecutor Bennett rested the prosecution's case on the morning testimony. The evidence would come later, the photographs, the video, but the human testimony had been given. The truth had been spoken aloud in a courtroom under oath. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. I'd told my story. I'd told the truth. And now, it was out of my hands. I walked back to the defense table and sat down. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture only I would see. I looked over at Judge Crawford. He was writing something in his notebook, his expression judicial and neutral. But I saw something shift in his face. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes narrowed just for a moment, and it seemed like he understood something that the rest of the courtroom hadn't quite grasped yet. This wasn't just about a break line. This wasn't just about attempted murder. This was about truth, about the gap between what people pretend to be and what they actually are. About a woman so consumed with control that she'd decided the only solution was elimination. Judge Crawford looked up from his notebook, and for just a moment, his eyes met mine. And in that moment, I understood that he knew. He understood that Sophia had tried to kill me, and he understood why. It was about who she really was. If you're still watching until here, please comment below to let me know you're still walking this journey with me. What's about to happen next is the moment everything changes, evidence, testimony, and the final truth revealed in court. If you don't want to witness the story fully unfold, you can turn off the video right here. After the lunch break, Prosecutor Bennett stood up with the final evidence. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to present the hardware store surveillance video. This video is time-stamped and verified by the store's security system." The screen came to life. The courtroom fell silent as we all watched. Vivian appeared on screen walking through the hardware store with purpose. She knew exactly what she was looking for. She went straight to the section with tubing cutters, selected one, paid in cash, and left. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. 2 days before the garage incident. Then 10 minutes later, 10:03 p.m. According to the timestamp, Sophia walked into the same store. She didn't buy anything. She just walked through the aisles looking around, looking at the section where Vivian had been. Her face was visible on the video, clear, unmistaken. And when she saw the empty spot where the tubing cutter had been displayed, her expression changed. She understood. She knew what Vivian had done, and she was satisfied. The video ended. No one in the courtroom moved. The jury was staring at the blank screen. Patricia was taking notes. Judge Crawford was watching the reactions of Sophia and Vivian, his eyes sharp and assessing. Prosecutor Bennett then presented the timeline. Not just words, but a visual display on a large board. Day 1, financial control. Sophia begins managing all of Victor's accounts. Day 5, first threat. Vivian demands money and threatens false accusation if Victor refuses. Day 6, escalation. Sophia sees the hardware store, confirms Vivian's purchase. Day 7, execution, brake line, cut truck, sabotaged, waiting for Victor to drive. Day 8, discovery. Victor survives by chance, truck discovered at Derek's garage. The pattern was undeniable. Not random, calculated, systematic, planned. Then Patricia stood up. "The defense rests," she said simply. She didn't need to argue. The evidence spoke louder than any closing statement could. That's when Patricia called Richard to the stand. Richard walked into the courtroom, and both Sophia and Vivian visibly reacted. Sophia's face went pale. Vivian's composure slipped for just a moment, fear flickering across her face before she could control it again. Richard was sworn in. He was in his 50s now, living in California, happy, safe, a world away from Sophia. But his voice was steady as he testified. "I dated Sophia 15 years ago," he said. "We were engaged, actually. And during that time, she did exactly what's being described here. She took control of my finances. Then she made accusations against me, threatened to go to the police with lies. And I realized very clearly that if I didn't leave, I might not survive." "Did you ever see evidence of escalation?" Patricia asked. "Did the threats ever become more than verbal?" Richard paused. "We were separated and she—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "She tried to poison my coffee, just once. I caught her, and that's when I understood that if I didn't disappear, she might actually kill me. The courtroom was absolutely silent. "I've been expecting this call for years," Richard continued. I knew she would do it to someone else. And when I heard she'd done it to Victor, I wasn't surprised. This is her pattern. This is who she is. Counsel Bradford didn't even bother with cross-examination. He just sat there silent. It was the most damning thing he could have done, the absence of defense, the acceptance that there was nothing to defend against. Judge Crawford had been writing throughout the testimony. His expression was carefully neutral, but his jaw was clenched. His eyes were hard in a way I hadn't seen before. And when Richard testified about the attempted poisoning, Judge Crawford's hand actually paused over his notes. Just for a moment. But long enough. Patricia made her closing statement brief. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Material evidence of sabotage. Video evidence of premeditation. Testimony from multiple witnesses, including another victim of the same pattern. The case is straightforward." Then Judge Crawford looked out at the courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, he said, his voice formal and final, "The court finds probable cause that Vivian Stephanie did deliberately and with intent cut the brake line on the vehicle, thereby endangering the life of Victor Reynolds. This constitutes attempted murder." He paused, letting that sink in. Furthermore, Judge Crawford continued, "Based on testimony regarding Vivian's statements and Sophia's knowledge of and participation in said act, the court finds probable cause that Sophia Reynolds aided, abetted, and conspired in this attempted murder." His eyes moved to where Sophia and Vivian sat. Both defendants are remanded in custody pending trial. Bail is set at $250,000 each, non-negotiable. The courtroom erupted. Not with sound exactly, but with movement. Bailiffs moved forward. Vivian stood up, her composure finally breaking. Sophia turned to her, and I saw her mouth something. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Vivian's reaction. She nodded slightly, and in that moment, something shifted in Vivian's face. It went blank. Empty. Like a door closing on whatever humanity she'd been pretending to have. That was the moment I finally understood. Sophia had done this before. She would do it again. Not because she was mentally ill or driven by circumstance, but because this was who she was. This was what she was capable of. Calculated, deliberate, willing to kill to maintain control. And Vivian had learned from her. Had accepted the mission, had become part of the machinery of destruction. Judge Crawford was watching them being led away, and his expression was hard in a way that suggested he understood something deeper than just the legal facts. His jaw was tight. His eyes were sad, like he'd seen this before, like he knew this pattern in a way that went beyond the courtroom. Patricia squeezed my hand. "You did it," she whispered. "You survived." But I wasn't thinking about surviving anymore. I was thinking about truth, about the power of evidence, about how sometimes justice actually works if you have the strength to present the facts and the courage to be believed. And I was thinking about Judge Crawford's expression when Richard mentioned the poisoning, like he'd recognized something personal in that testimony, like he understood Sophia's nature because he'd seen it hurt someone he loved. We would find out later what that meant. But in that moment, as Sophia and Vivian were led away in custody, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, not closure, but the knowledge that I'd done what I came to do. I'd spoken the truth, and the truth finally had been enough. The courtroom doors closed behind me with a soft, pneumatic hiss. Around me, people moved with purpose, reporters gathering equipment, families turning away from each other in that particular way they do when something irreversible has happened. Judge Crawford's gavel had fallen less than an hour ago. Vivian and Sophia had been led out in handcuffs. Sophia hadn't looked at me at all, I should have felt something. Victory, relief, something. But what I felt instead was a kind of hollowness expanding inside my chest, filling spaces I hadn't known were empty. I survived. That's what I kept thinking. I survived. But somewhere along the way, I'd started believing that surviving and winning were the same thing. Standing there in the Phoenix sunlight, I realized they absolutely were not. Derek was waiting by his truck, leaning against the door. When he saw me, he straightened up. We didn't need words anymore. He walked over and pulled me into a brief, solid hug. No dialogue, no commentary. Derek understood that words had already done their job, and some things didn't need explaining. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get out of here." We drove north toward Scottsdale, away from downtown. The Arizona landscape stretched out red rock and sparse desert vegetation and endless sky. My phone rang as we pulled into traffic. "Patricia, congratulations," she said warmly. "You did it. You won." I'd heard myself respond before really thinking about it. "I didn't win, Patricia. I survived. There's a difference." There had been a pause. "Yes," she'd said. "There is. But for what it's worth, you won the right way. You told the truth. You presented evidence. You didn't compromise. That matters." Maybe it did. But integrity doesn't fill the space where 12 years of marriage used to be. It doesn't return the house I'd have to sell to pay legal fees. It doesn't restore the reputation that Sophia had systematically dismantled. That was the thing nobody told you about justice. It didn't undo anything. It didn't erase the false memories, those moments I'd treasured, thinking they were real connection, only to realize now that they were carefully constructed illusions. I remembered the night Sophia cooked dinner for my birthday, the candlelight, the way she'd said, "You mean everything to me." I'd believed her. I'd believed all of it, and that belief had become a kind of poison of its own. "You okay?" Derek asked, and I realized we'd been driving in silence. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "I thought I would feel different, lighter maybe." "You will," Derek said. "Just not today. Today is about surviving the day. Tomorrow is about the rest." When the text message came in at 5:47 p.m., I knew before looking who it was from. Some kind of instinct. I opened it. "You've destroyed everything. I hope you can live with what you've done." I read it once. Then I held my phone over the trash can next to my motel bed and deleted it without responding. I didn't save it. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't do any of the things the old Victor would have done. The Victor who believed that every communication was important, that every message was part of some larger pattern I needed to track. Her words had no power anymore. They were just pixels on a screen, and I had control over whether I let them exist in my awareness. For years, everything Sophia said had landed like a weight in my chest, had burrowed deep, had caused me to question myself and my perceptions. But sitting there in that anonymous motel room, watching those pixels disappear into deletion, I realized something: she no longer gets to do that. The gavel had severed something. The thing that had let her control me was broken, now shattered beyond repair. I lay back on the bed and closed my eyes. Outside, the Phoenix evening was settling into that particular darkness that comes with winter. Somewhere across the city, Vivian and Sophia were in custody. Somewhere, Derek was probably having dinner with his wife, telling her that justice had been served the way it's supposed to be. And I was here, still breathing, still alive, still myself. The victory felt hollow because it was hollow. But that was all right. Hollowness meant emptiness, meant freedom, meant possibility. It meant I'd paid an enormous price, and the price had been the truth. The truth about Sophia, the truth about myself, the truth about what love looks like when it wears a mask. I'd won. Patricia had been right about that. Derek had been right about that. But I'd also lost everything, and I was going to have to learn how to make peace with winning anyway. That was the real victory. Not the verdict, not the arrests, but the fact that I could sit with both truths at the same time, that I had lost and survived, that I had paid and would keep paying, and that surviving itself could be enough. For now, it had to be. 2 days after the verdict, with Patricia beside me, I drove back to Riverside for the last time. The streets looked different now, sharper, colder, like seeing something familiar through clear glass for the first time. Everything felt smaller. The house, the neighborhood, the life I'd built, all of it had shrunk. Officer Morrison was waiting at the front door. Behind her, I could see the familiar shadows of rooms I'd lived in for 12 years. Sophia was inside with her attorney. No bail, no fight, just the quiet machinery of legal separation grinding forward. The house smelled like Sophia's preferred scent diffuser, something floral I'd never liked. The furniture was exactly where it had always been, but the space felt hollow, like a museum exhibit of someone else's life. Family home, 2014-2026. The walls held no warmth anymore. Sophia sat on the sofa when I entered. She wore dark clothes, her hair pulled back tight, and when she looked at me, there was nothing. No remorse, no anger, no attempt at manipulation. I realized then that I'd never mattered to her as a person. I'd only ever been useful. Now that I wasn't, she'd simply moved on. "Victor," she said. Her voice was steady, empty of anything real. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Patricia produced the divorce papers. Sophia's attorney, a thin man named Matthews, reviewed them quickly. No objections. No drawn-out battle. She was keeping the house and vehicles. I was taking the liquid assets, $40,000. No spousal support. She wanted this over as quickly as I did. I signed my name 3 times. By the time I finished the 3rd signature, I was no longer married. While Morrison documented everything I removed, I gathered the pieces of my actual life. My clothes, my books, the photograph albums from before I'd met Sophia, my father's watch, my grandmother's china, and the will I'd found in the safe deposit box, a will from before the marriage, leaving everything to my sister. That detail hit hard. Sophia had been planning all along for a scenario where I might not be around to contest anything. When Patricia found the wedding album, Victor and Sophia Forever, she held it up silently. I told her to burn it. By 1 o'clock, the sedan was loaded. We drove north without speaking, the landscape shifting from developed sprawl to desert, from civilization to something wilder. I was leaving behind 12 years of marriage, a house, a reputation. In Riverside, there would be people who believed Sophia's narrative, who thought I'd manipulated the trial somehow. That was their story to carry, not mine. Scottsdale appeared like an oasis, expensive, quiet, full of people who'd come to reinvent themselves. Nobody asked questions about your history here. Patricia helped me find a small 1-bedroom condo near Camelback Mountain, with a view toward the Sonoran Desert, and a silence that felt almost sacred. I signed the lease on a Friday afternoon. For the first month, I slept. I walked in the mornings and evenings, learning the neighborhood, the coffee shop, the gym, the running trail. I blocked Sophia's number. I deleted my social media. I became someone new simply by deciding not to be Victor Ashford, the wronged husband, anymore. By the end of January, I'd started to feel something I hadn't felt in years, curiosity about tomorrow. Not fear, not dread. Just the simple question. What happens next? I'd lost the marriage, the house, my reputation. I'd lost the comfortable fiction of being loved by someone I trusted. But I'd gained clarity. I'd gained the understanding that survival was its own kind of victory. I'd learned that I could lose everything and still wake up in the morning. I'd learned to see people clearly, to recognize manipulation when it's happening, to trust the evidence of my own perception. In the quiet of my new apartment, with desert light streaming through windows, I was still learning to see through. I understood something Judge Crawford probably knew all along. Clarity is a kind of self-rescue. It's not triumphant. It's quieter than that. It's like finally waking up from a long dream and remembering who you are. And in Scottsdale, surrounded by people who didn't know my story, I was learning how to be that person again. 1 month later, dawn in Scottsdale. I'm sitting on my apartment balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the Arizona River flow past in that slow, patient way it has. The light is still soft, that particular quality of early morning when the world hasn't quite committed to being awake yet. And I realize something as I sit here. I can finally turn around. I'm not happy in the way that people in movies are happy. There's no music swelling, no dramatic moment of triumph. It's quieter than that. It's the simple fact that my hands aren't shaking, that I can drink coffee without my stomach clenching, that I can look at my phone without fear of what message might be waiting. I'm safe, and for now, that's enough. My phone buzzes around 7:30. Derek. "Just calling to tell you I'm proud of you, man," he says. His voice is warm, solid, the same voice that's been steady through all of this. "You did the right thing. You were brave. And I wanted you to hear that from someone who actually knows you." After we hang up, I find an email from Richard. The subject line says simply, "You're not alone." "If you ever need anything," he writes, "I'm here. You're not the only one dealing with this. There are more of us than you think, more than you know, and that matters. Knowing that matters." Then around 8 o'clock, something arrives in my actual mailbox, a handwritten note. The envelope has no return address, but when I open it, I see Judge Crawford's letterhead. "Victor, my daughter experienced something similar years ago. Not break lines, but betrayal from the people she trusted most. She never had the courage to tell anyone. She carried it silently for years. Your testimony didn't just convict a criminal, it gave her permission to finally speak about what happened to her. She called me after the trial. For the first time in a decade, she told me what she'd been hiding. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. You helped more than just yourself. Judge Crawford." I read that letter 3 times, and something shifts in me as I do. I'm not the only one. That's what lands. I survived something that Richard survived. I recognized something in Judge Crawford's courtroom that his daughter was too afraid to name. Derek knew what manipulation looked like because he'd seen it before. Patricia knew how to fight it because she'd fought it for others. We're a community of survivors, and I never even knew it until now. That afternoon, I make a decision. I call Patricia and ask her to help me set up a foundation, something dedicated to helping people escape dangerous situations. I liquidate some of my recovered assets. I'm not wealthy, not anymore, but I have enough. I donate $50,000 to an organization that helps domestic violence survivors relocate and rebuild their lives. 2 weeks later, a letter arrives. It's anonymous, but the handwriting is small and careful, like it took enormous effort to write. "Thank you for helping me get out. Your story saved me. I was too afraid to leave until I heard what you said in that courtroom. You proved that the truth matters, that we matter. I'm safe now. I'm rebuilding. And every day I'm grateful to someone I'll never meet who chose to tell the truth, even when it cost him everything." I sit with that letter for a long time. By mid-February, I understand something fundamental. I didn't survive just to exist. I survived for a reason. Not because there's some grand cosmic plan, I'm not naive enough to believe that anymore, but because survival itself can be a choice to mean something. Survival can be an action. It can be a gift you give to someone else. I think about what I'm going to say if someone asks me about all of this. What I'm going to tell people who find themselves in a similar darkness. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, I would tell them, listen to me carefully. Trust your instincts. If something feels cold in your own home, if your skin crawls when someone touches you, don't ignore it. Those signals exist for a reason. Document things. Reach out. Tell someone you trust. The truth needs witnesses. Justice might take time. It might cost you everything. But I promise you this, it will come. Truth always comes forward eventually. I didn't yell. I didn't fight dramatically. I just stepped aside and let the truth do its work. If this story reaches you in any way, if it resonates, if it helps, if it saves you, share it. Pass it forward, because there's someone in your life who needs to hear that they're not alone. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. Stay vigilant. Stay aware. Because wisdom isn't just knowing what's right. It's knowing when something is wrong and having the courage to act. I finish my coffee as the sun rises fully over the desert. The river keeps flowing. The world keeps turning. And I'm still here, not broken, not healed exactly, but moving. Learning. Finding purpose in survival. I didn't get my marriage back. I didn't get my house back. I didn't get back the years I spent believing a lie. But I got clarity. And I got a future that belongs to me again. That's a life worth living. I've told you my story about blindness, about love, that blinds you, about how someone can use sweet words to hide murderous intent. I was naive. I let myself be controlled too long before I saw the truth. So today, I want to tell you, don't be like me. Don't wait until your enemy cuts your brake lines. Don't blindly trust sweet words when actions are cold. Don't ignore warning signs out of fear. God gave us intuition to protect ourselves. Listen to it. The lesson is simple. Truth always wins, but it needs someone brave enough to speak it. That's why I'm here. Other survivors, Richard, Judge, Crawford, Derek, they lived through similar family drama. God gave us the chance to help each other through this family drama that destroys lives. Your safety matters more than anything. Truth matters more than sweet lies. God will support you if you have the courage to ask for help. This story is about survival. It's about family drama, a family destroyed by deception and manipulation. This family drama taught me how family wounds become deadly when untreated. But it's also about recovery, about finding clarity after fighting darkness. Thank you for staying with me. Please comment and tell me. If you see yourself in this family drama victim or trusting soul, what did you do to protect yourself? I want to hear your story. And a warning. Episodes ahead explore deeper family drama designed to educate you about recognizing manipulators. If these topics make you uncomfortable, please step away. Your mental health comes first. Stay vigilant. Stay awake. God is always by your side.